One type of market failure is called an externality. In economics, an externality is any time that you have a private decision that has some spillover influence on those around you, either spillover costs or spillover benefits, right? You can think about doing something and your action imposes a cost on those around you, or doing something and your action confers a benefit on those around you. We have two different types of externalities based on benefits and costs. The first, negative externalities, those are the ones that are based on costs. Positive externalities are those that are based on benefits. We've got some language that we can adopt. Negative externalities exist when a private individual imposes some additional cost on society. So I'm going to use the term society here to simply represent the aggregation of all the individuals in the system. That's what I'm thinking about when I think about system. So or society. So you might also see, if you look at other references, this referred to as the public cost versus the private cost. I'm using the same concept, maybe just a little bit different language. Again, costs are the things that we give up in something. So we can think about a couple of different situations. An individual choosing to smoke, an individual company deciding to extract some coal out of the ground, an individual farmer deciding to raise hogs. All of these activities come with some cost to the individuals who are making the choice to engage in that activity. But the negative externality comes about when their actions, when their decisions imposes an additional cost on those around them, right? So that's where we come up with this definition that the private costs are less than the social costs, or said differently, that the social costs are greater than the private costs. Notice that each of these decision makers are part of the system, so the social costs have to include private costs. We could think of a situation if private costs are equal to social costs. If those two things are equal, then it simply means that everyone is only affecting themselves. But whenever you do an action and imposes a cost on someone around you, then the total cost of the system is going to be greater than your individual private cost. For smoking a cigarette, you smoke, secondhand smoke, pretty straightforward that that's imposing some cost on those around you. When a single company decides to pollute the air and it imposes a health cost on the community where that factory is located, that's the additional cost that causes social cost to be higher than the private cost of that company. Same thing with hog farming, right? Very, very polluted sort of farming, and so their actions can often impose a cost on the water of those around them. Positive externalities are when we have the same sort of structure in terms of imposing something on someone else, but now this is a good imposing. These are benefits that are imposed on others. We can do the same sort of structure to this. Positive externalities are when the private benefits, that is, the benefits that the individuals receive, are less than the benefits to all of society, right? And remember, the private individual is part of society, so this inequality here means that you're doing something and it confers a benefit on those around you. Like, for example, if my neighbors decide to light off fireworks, they're going to get a benefit out of it. They're going to get some enjoyment, but they also confer a benefit on me. I also get to enjoy those fireworks. When people choose to get vaccinated, there's two aspects of getting vaccinated, right? There's the fact that you are protected from a disease, but then there's this social aspect to it, that you are also reducing the communicability of those diseases, right? So you've got your own private benefits, but then there's also this additional benefit in the system. And we can also think about higher education, or just education in general. There's a benefit to people getting educated for themselves, and that they are smarter, they have greater skills, but there's also a benefit to society of having an educated populace. So we can think about externalities coming in two different forms, benefits and costs, but the same idea that it has an impact on those around you. The implications are very different. So we can think about, Adam Smith argues that we should all be decentralized with our decision making, that we should be very, very rational and self-interested, that we should put blinders on and not think about the benefits or the costs that we impose on others around them. Well, with a little bit of graph, we know that in general, a big pattern in economics is that the benefits of additional units, the marginal benefit of additional action, tends to diminish, right? You can think about your studying. The first hour of studying has a big benefit, but the more and more you study, the lower the benefit is. That's true true with all of these activities. Everything in life pretty much has a diminishing marginal benefit. And the marginal cost, what you have to give up to do something, that increases the more you do of something, right? That first hour of studying, you're not cutting anything important out of your life. But the second and the third and the fifth and the 20th hour of studying, what you give up becomes increasingly more valuable. The marginal cost increases. Or if we think about it from a firm perspective, as long as this firm faces diminishing marginal productivity of its resources, of its inputs, then they're going to have an increasing marginal cost structure, right? So with a negative externality, the definition was that the social costs are greater than the private costs. We can think about this lower line representing the marginal cost to any of these three decision makers, right? The smoker, his cost of smoking, the company, their cost of extracting coal, the farmer, his cost of hog farming, being less than the social cost. The social cost of this man's decision to smoke is that he has a cost and the people around him also have a cost through the secondhand smoke. The social cost of coal extraction includes the cost of the company to extract the coal and the additional health consequences to the rest of the community. The social costs are higher than the private costs. Well, what we end up with is that Adam Smith argues markets, 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 and private decision making, where individuals use decentralized decision making with blinders on and rational self-interest. But when we think about decentralized decision making in the context of a negative externality, decentralized decision making, that is, when individuals only take into account their own private costs and benefits, we end up with an overproduction of that activity. We get too much from a socially good perspective, from a socially efficient perspective. We end up with too much of an output. So on a graph, I can identify that point. If I see where this private marginal cost crosses the private marginal cost, and if I compare it to the social marginal cost, where socially, based on costs and benefits, how much would we produce, the private level of production is greater than what the socially efficient level of production should be. There's too much production of something. So maybe we finally have a positive role for government in this class, where governments may be able to fix this market failure based on private decision making in the context of negative externality, producing too much of an activity. How do you decrease the amount of something? Well, number one, the government can place a tax on something. Taxes discourage activity. If negative externalities lead to too much activity, the government needs to discourage it. One thing they can do is impose taxes. We have a name for those. Those are called Pigovian taxes when they're based on an environmental negative externality. Or alternatively, the government can try to place some kind of regulation on it, and that is, again, regulation that's trying to limit the quantity, or they can put simply an outright ban on some things. We can contrast that with a positive externality. With a positive externality, we have the story where you're doing something and you're conferring a benefit on those around you. Well, again, we've got the same sort of structure with an upward sloping cost of an activity. If we think about fireworks or education or vaccines, the more we have of those things, the more costly additional amounts of them will become. But with also all of these things, there's diminishing marginal benefit, right? There's a diminishing marginal benefit to the population getting vaccinated. There's diminishing marginal benefit to fireworks and education. But what we have is that the private benefits, so the individual setting off the firework, the individual getting immunized, they have some benefit to this. But there's also this additional societal benefit. There's additional spillover benefits, right? It's the benefits of those lighting off the fireworks and the other people in the neighborhood. It's the person getting vaccinated and the protection of those around them from having the disease communicated to them. There's these additional spillover benefits that happen with positive externalities. Again, Adam Smith says, decentralized decision-making, putting your blinders on. If we had individuals doing their private costs and private benefits, well, right, if we look at private benefits versus the private costs, if individuals do that decentralized rational self-interest based on private benefits and costs, rather than thinking about the additional benefits they confer on society, the amount that will be produced is not too much, but too little, right? And that makes sense. If you fail to take into account the additional benefits that you confer on those around you, you're not going to do as much as you otherwise would. So maybe the government can step in, and this time they're not trying to discourage activity, right? These activities have spillover benefits, so they want to encourage these activities. They can do the opposite of taxes. They can subsidize. Whereas taxes are taking money away for when you do something or buy something, subsidies are when the government transfers money to you for doing something or buying something. And there's many different forms that subsidies can take, but subsidies are meant to encourage activity. Or alternatively, the government can also regulate or require something. Again, when we talk about the government regulating something, we're thinking about vaccines. They regulate those, but not to discourage them. They regulate them to encourage that activity, or they can outright require the thing to happen.